See, I think when you look at the documentary as a form, I think it's very difficult now to have watertight compartments in which different genres exist. Um, Broadly, you could say that there is a essay mode of filmmaking, or there is a observational mode of filmmaking, um, and then there is also what they call the ethnographic mode of filmmaking. Now, sometimes it's not really possible to separate these, because the observational documentary, what does it do? You watch and are amongst people, and you film them on a continuous basis, very carefully, very silently, trying to meld into the background. The ethnographic film also does something quite similar, you know. So in my case, I would argue that at least the last 2 or 3 films that I have done, they are probably essay films, because they're also political in content, but we are using real material. So that real material is ethnographic in that sense. It's about people, it's about their lives, it's about how they live, you know. But say, I made a film in Kashmir, Jashn-e-Azadi, for example. Now, in a conventional way, I don't think you would describe it as ethnographic. But there is material in it which is ethnographic. So I think that I personally don't think, I think that maybe 20 years ago, you could broadly make a case that there is something called the ethnographic film. And that is because the ethnographic film came out of anthropology and that discipline. But today, I think that it's all kind of merging, and it's not really possible to separate. So I would not be able to define a clear space for the visual ethnographic film, other than to say that yes, the raw material for me of the documentary film is the life of people, and how they live, how they interact, and so on. So I think that's a very interesting question, and this is a question that used to be asked in anthropology also, between observation and participant observation. Now, if you take the film that you're referring to, which is Jashn-e-Azadi, there are 2 sequences in the film to which I'll draw your attention to. One is the one you've talked about, which is right at the beginning of the film, where we encounter a father who's come to the graveyard looking for the grave of his son. And then we engage him in a conversation, and then he shows us around. And then towards the end of the film, there is a funeral of a militant. And there are thousands of people, and we are right in the middle of them. Now, in the latter case, I'm not speaking to anyone, I'm not asking any questions, but I don't think I'm less of a participant, So I think that the fact that somebody from behind the camera asks a question doesn't make me more of a participant, Sometimes you'll find in other films that you will see that there is a lot of questions from behind the camera, but that doesn't reduce the distance between the filmmaker and the subject, So I think the position that you're asking about, the position of the participant, is not simply determined by who's asking the question and whether I'm following or I'm not following. It really has to do with what's in the mind of the filmmaker. I think that's the important thing. You can be very distant and very cool, and yet the way you frame and the way you edit can really make it a very intense, kind of relationship between the subject and whatever. So once again, no firm rules. Simply because I'm asking a question doesn't make me a participant. And sometimes when I'm asking no questions and I'm watching very silently, I can have a very intense relationship with what's going on around me. In the most recent film, which is Jashn-e-Azadi, I chose to bring in poetry because I was having a great deal of difficulty in getting people to speak about experiences that they had been through. My film was made in 2004, and I wanted people to talk about what they had experienced in the 1990s, which in Kashmir was a very dark and difficult period, and people were not willing to speak. Now the situation has changed. So we were looking at a way in which we could find an expression for what people had experienced, but interviews was not going to give me that material. So I then started looking at poetry, because I thought that sometimes poetry can become a useful, and in Kashmir we have a long tradition of poetry being a part of everyday life. So then I found these poems and then cut images onto those poems. So in that case, in the case of Jashn-e-Azadi, the use of poetry was to achieve something which was not otherwise possible. In the case of Red Ant Dream, my use of, let's say, Adivasi dance or music or culture, a wedding, was very different, because I wanted people to understand that in these tribal areas, people have an enormous wealth of cultural richness. Most people think, oh, there's nothing there. There's just some forest and a few people. But what is invisible to people is the richness. So I often say that in Red Ant Dream, that wedding that I shot in the Niyamgiri mountains, I said just in that wedding, the beauty of how people are dressed and how they are dancing and what they are playing on music, that is worth much more than any mining company can ever produce on this earth, even if they try for 500 years. So that was a different reason. And of course, in the case of the film that I made in the Narmada Valley, Words on Water, there we actually wrote some songs. So I worked with people who used to be part of this band called Indian Ocean, and we wrote a song and we composed it, because it was a movement, and it was a movement which had a certain way of looking at the world. So we thought that music could help bind the film together, otherwise sometimes the landscape slows you down, so when you want to lift it up a little bit. So I would say that yes, each of these three films uses what we would broadly call cultural material, but the reasons are different each time. We use it for a different reason. One is that at least because I'm a documentary filmmaker, I can't imagine just putting music on it, even if it's great music. The way in feature films, for half an hour, the music will please keep playing at the back. So the music is not meant to sort of bind the shots together, which is one way of making a film, that you lay a track of music and you cut so that then any jumps become smoothened out by music. And in each case, a lot of attention is paid to what emerges on location. So, if drums are being played at a certain place, then we would make a recording of that. If people are singing, we make a recording of that. So it's actually not very different from how we respond to what we see. What we see, you respond to it and then you edit it in a certain way. Similarly, what you hear speech, but you also hear music. So how do you take that music and turn it into something? So for me, ideally, my ideal reaction from an audience is that people don't even realize they are listening to music until afterwards. They'll also say, or maybe the second time they'll see something, they'll say, hey, that was nice music. It shouldn't be obvious. In just the same way that with cinematography, and I've had the good fortune of working with really good cinematographers. When you're watching, you shouldn't be able to say, my God, great cinematography. It should be afterwards that you feel that, oh, what did I see? Like that. So yes, the use of music is very carefully done. But I must tell you a very interesting thing. I work with, at least for the last two films, I worked with this very exceptional sound designer called Madhu Apsara, who works in Bombay. And when I'm sort of describing to him how we want a certain scene, I'm always trying to make it subtle and subtle and subtle and not make it too much over. And then once he told me, listen, there's a point beyond which people will not hear it at all. So if you're using music, you can't make it too subtle either, then don't use music, use something else, use effects. So it's a very delicate business, the use of sound, because you can overpower and it can become like you're watching the image and you're shaking your head to the music, which happens often in films. But you don't want that. You want them to pay attention to the image, and you want them to pay attention to the word and to the subtitle. And to me, those are very important elements. Like, I spend a lot of time on subtitling because I feel that if you're hearing an Adivasi from Central India speak, he's a very smart person. And if I subtitle it badly, you'll never know. So to me, the cinematography is important, the music is important, the editing is important, but even the subtitling is important because you have to respect the person who is speaking, and that's very important as well. I mean, in some senses, it's because that's the nature of life itself, simultaneity is the nature of life itself. No, it's not in a conventional narrative. You have an arc, you build up to some climax, then you have a resolution, then you have a bigger climax, and you have a resolution. Ultimately, you have a last climax. Whereas actually, whether it's in Kashmir or it's in Chhattisgarh or it's in the Narmada Valley, you want to constantly alert audiences that, listen, it's not as beautiful as you think it is, So sometimes in Jashn-e-Azadi, we would show a flash of something. The audience can't fully comprehend. So they'll say, what was that? And that's it. And then you move on. Then after some time, you introduce another such thing. So what happens is that your audience starts thinking that something is happening. So when you come to that thing, you already know that something is happening. And that's very important for me, that you don't delude your audience into saying, oh, this is all going to be very peaceful, and then, oh, what happened? That you kind of alert them that, and it can be a bit confusing for your audiences because people can say, why did I see that? But after some time, if you do it respectfully with your audience, after some time, people will say, okay, they are telling us something. They're telling us to be alert for something, So it works. The bottom line of what I want to say is that in the construction of a film, and you would have noticed this yourself, there are lots of little details, right? Sometimes you think that these are details that no one will understand, that it's just you do it for your own sake. But that's not true. In my experience, and I show my films quite a lot, and I don't just show them in Delhi and Bombay, and I show them in small places. People get every little detail. And that's the remarkable thing, that no matter how sophisticated an idea it is, whether it's with sound or it's with picture or it's with text, people will read it and they will register it also. And that's very, very, to me, Jashn-e-Azadi was a very important film because it is a very complex film. It's not easy. It doesn't make anything easy for the audience. And yet, in my 30 years of filmmaking, it's the film that I have shown most often. It's a 2-hour and 19-minute film, so it's a difficult film. So what does that tell you? It tells you that people are willing to go through something which is difficult, which is challenging, which is not easy, which is absolutely the opposite of what the commercial cinema believes. That, ye nahi chalega, make it easy, make it easy, make it easy. That you don't have to make it easy, which is not to say that you make it impossible for your audience to understand what you're saying, but you can have quite a complex narrative, and so long as complex narratives work when the film is slightly long, because you have to draw your audience in, you have to get them used to what they're seeing. Once you draw them in, then you can really throw difficult things at them, and that's remarkable. I like to believe, and I like to say this also, that for me, a documentary is an argument. I have a certain way of seeing something, and I want to persuade you. I want to say that I'm not a neutral person. So there are not only 2 or 3 perspectives on a matter. It's not like that in Bastar we have the view of the Adivasis, and we have the view of the Maoists, and then we have the views of the state. I also have a view, and I think it's important that we accept that every documentary film is an argument. I'm asking you, I'm saying, listen, this is my understanding of what I saw. I'm not saying this is the truth. I'm saying this is my understanding of it. And if my argument is good, I will be able to persuade you. If my argument is bad, you will dismiss it. So it doesn't matter whether it's the government's point of view, it's the Maoist point of view, it's the Adivasis' point of view. So long as we accept that this is the point of view of the filmmaker, because there is how can we say that this is from the point of view of the Adivasis? Which Adivasi? Who are we talking about? Where? Or the government? What does that mean? Is it the government? Is it the industrialist? Whose point of view are we talking about? So I think for me the best thing is for filmmakers to accept that we are making very, very individual statements, but the challenge is how well am I doing it? So if I make a film on Kashmir, which is a contentious issue in India, I don't expect you to say, oh yeah, he's right. This is how it is in Kashmir. No. But I want you to say, this is what this man is saying, and I should make it very difficult for you to dismiss it. And this is a claim that I can make, that I don't think the films I do, people can't dismiss them easily. They might disagree with them. No problem. I don't have a problem with that. But you can't say, "Arey, ye to aise hi bol diya," it's nothing. So you bring together a diversity of materials, you put them together in an interesting, interlinked, complicated way, and you draw people into your argument so that when they leave, they'll never be able to totally dismiss it and say, that was nothing. That's one thing that they will not be able to do. You have to. So in that sense, that's the perspective. It's my perspective. And I believe that every documentary film, every good documentary film, is an individual's perspective. It's an individual's understanding of it. It's an individual's argument. And that argument can be a good argument. It can be a bad argument. It can be a skillfully made argument. It can be a crudely made. Sometimes very, very good films are very simple and crude. They don't have to be very sophisticated. It can be made very simply, but there's something in the presentation of facts that you can't dismiss it. And that makes it an effective piece of communication. Government is objecting. It's usually some individual, some small group of people who want to create trouble, who want to make a name for themselves, so they create trouble, So I would say that, say with Jashn-e-Azadi, if 5 or 6 or 7 screenings were blocked, I also did have 150 screenings where I was there, So it's okay, if 5, 6, 7 screenings didn't happen, it's all right. And then the other interesting thing is, every time a screening was stopped somewhere, for whatever, police, educational institution, the audience magnifies, because young people, I know that, say for example in Pune at Symbiosis there was to be a screening, it had to be called off. The students had private screenings, other students in other cities heard of it, they had private screenings. So in this day and age, I don't believe that you can actually stop people from watching something, so I'm not looking for trouble, but and I'm careful, but I believe that you have to do the work that you've got to do. You have to do it well, and you have to be thoughtful, and you don't have to be shabby and careless. But if you do all that properly, your audience is there. You'll get to that audience. So, the filmmakers often use this as an excuse to say, oh, we have such a hard time and all that. I don't. Hard time is when they put you in jail. No, nobody goes gone to jail as yet. So, this is not hard time. This much we have to deal with. There's no doubt about it. Otherwise, we're not doing anything useful.